Hello, my name is Guillaume. I'm a Canadian pension actuary and the author of the Actuarial Excel Addin. The Actuarial Excel Addin adds functionalities to Excel workbooks to perform simple and complex actuarial valuation of pension plans and pension plan administration tasks like calculation of benefits, preparation of benefit statements, and preparation of annual statements. Since 2005, the add-in has been used by actuaries and pension plan administrators. Trial of the actual Excel add-in is available for free at the address appearing on screen. Welcome to this video, part of a growing series of tutorials. So let's turn off the camera and start the tutorial. I hope to see you there. I want to explain you today two functionality of the actual add-in would be the create the input sheet and the create the result sheet. Um, if I normally it will be done in that order. You first use create the input sheet and then create the result sheet. If I use it now, I will have a error message, a pop-up saying that the data sheet does not exist because before you can create the input sheet, you need to create a data sheet, the sheet that will contain the data for your calculation. Could be an actuarial valuation or any other project. So let me create the data sheet. So first column A must be the ID always. You can name it the way you want, but the program will rename it as ID anyhow. So let's say ID, the name, the second information, and date of birth as third information. And so we can do some calculation. Let add a salary for it. I'll name a variable name AA just to explain you one more concept. So now I have to add some data. So let's say ID 1, 2, and 3. It could be any number. It could be a social insurance number, an employee number, or a number that you're creating. But each number must be unique. An ID cannot be used twice. It must be only used once. And then a name, and then a date of birth, so and AA, oops, that's a strange date, invalid date. And AA, I will do anything, let's say 4, 5, and 6. So now I have my data sheet ready. If I click create the input sheet, again, same error message. The reason is I have to name it. I have to name it data. So now I'm ready to create the input sheet. Okay, so okay, it's not completed. Okay, now it's completed. So I still have my data sheet. Some reformatting has been done, but the information is the same. And then I have a new sheet, which is input. I'll resize the columns so we can see it better. And what it shows in the input sheet is one row at a time. Here we have the ID 1. If I use the ID 2, I will have Anna. In the ID 3, I will have Robert. And that's one thing that the input sheet does. And also each variable has a name now. So the ID is name ID, the name is name with an underscore, date of birth with an underscore, and AA with an underscore. Underscore, it's in the has been added because if we go to settings, you'll see that I've asked to add the suffix underscore to variable names. And you have the options to remove it if you want. I recommend that you click or tick the box so you will have the suffix that avoids some confusion. For example, if we look at the variable AA underscore, With no suffix, it could also mean the columns double A. And so there is in the earlier version of the actual add-in, the suffix was not added, and in some circumstances it could create some problems. So it has been added. Now you have the options of adding it or not. For those who have created worksheet with the former version of the add-in, so could still run their worksheet. But I would suggest that for new worksheet, you add the suffix underscore. So the third, now we've created the input sheet. Now we can create the result sheet. But if I click on it, you'll see I have an error message. Output sheet cannot be found. Process will stop. Okay, because to create the result sheet, you first need to create an output sheet just to say what do you want in your result sheet. So let me add an output sheet. So in your output, you define the columns you want. Let's say ID, name, date of birth will be the same. And let's say a computed value. Computed, I will just call it computed. And then I tell where to look for this information. ID is equal to ID. Name is equal to name, in fact, with the underscore. And birth. And computed value, okay, I'll reformat that just for it so it looks better. A date, okay. Okay, and a computed value, I have nothing. I could do, let's say, for example, 3 times AA. Okay, we'll start with that. So if we go back to our input, AA is worth 6, so 3 times AA is worth 18. Now I have everything needed to go to create the result sheet. And if I click it, I have a box appearing asking me to select the IDs to process. By default, all the IDs would be processed, so all. Or I could use a subset. Let's say I select all. So I click continue, and the result sheet is being created. Okay, so you see the green tab here is my result sheet, and the tab has been named res for result, and in parentheses all, because all the IDs were selected. If I and you see maybe the result, in fact, we have the 3 records of my data, and with the computed value here. But that's a simple example. Normally, it would be you would have a separate sheet for the calculation. You could name it the way you want. Let's say I call it compute. And in my compute, I would say I would say computed value. Let's say I say 3 times AA underscore. So I have the same. So in my output now, I would rather instead of calculating it in my output, I will refer to my result in the compute sheet. Same thing, same end result, but done differently. So my compute sheet could be quite complex, could be an actual valuation where I do all the calculations for one member or for a retiree. Okay, so and then I'll show you one more. If I use a subset, the way to use subset is that you indicate which ID you want. It could be if you use the comma, it's a 1 by 1. I could say 1, 3, and 1, 2, and 3. So 1, comma 2, comma 3, meaning I want the ID 1, I want the ID 2, and I want the ID 3. Or I could say 1 hyphen 3. It means 1, 2, 3. 2 TO and not TWO. So 1, 2, 3, and I could say 1 comma and then 2, 2, 3. So it could be all kind of combination. Don't use space. It can only be IDs, comma, and hyphen. So if I click, for example, I'll say 2, 2, 3, for example, and then continue. A new result sheet will be created. Okay, it's still name res for result, and in parentheses you have 2-3, which was the selections we. So it's a separate sheet, and it doesn't erase the previous one because it has a different name. Okay, and let me show you one more thing. Is the you could have various scenario. For example, in an actuarial valuation, you could run the same calculation with different interest rate. So what I would do, I would create a sheet with my parameters, like I would call it PRM, but you can name it the way you want. I used to call it PRM for parameters, and then I would, let's say for this example, I would have a variable named multiplier, and I would have three scenario A, B, and C, and the multiplier would be worth 2, 3, and 4, for example. And here in the variable in my cell, I would select A. Okay, and I will do the selections with the H lookup. But first, I have to my cell here. Must be named scenario. Okay, and let me call that these cells tab PRM. But again, this is up to you. It doesn't have to be named, but just to do an H lookup on that on this cell. So I'm doing an H lookup with my scenario on my tab PRM, and then it will be the row, the second row, and last parameters is false. Not remember, not sure what false means, but that's the way it works. Uh, okay, so for if I let's say I change it to scenario B, for example, you see that that cell's the multiplier value has changed to 3. I'll name it. I'll name that variable multiplier just to use it in my computation sheet or my compute sheet. I prefer to name the variables. It's easier to verify the calculation. So here, instead of 3 times AA, I will say multiplier times AA. And multiplier is taken from my PRM sheet, and multiplier here is worth 3. If I say scenario C, for example, it will be worth 4. Now, if I run the create result sheet, you'll see again I have to select the IDs. Let's say I select all the IDs. So my result sheet has been created. Okay, finished. So, but the name, look at the name. It's res.c, C for taken from the scenario, and then underscore because of my settings. I asked for the name to be the variable's name to be followed by an underscore. So it created a new sheet, result C, and in parentheses we have all because all the IDs were selected. And this allows you to run various scenario on the same with the same worksheet with various or different parameters. So I hope the you like the explanation, and if you have question, comments, please write me at that email address. Thank you very much. Bye.